If I were to say this is the last Sunday of the year, some might be thinking I'm a month too soon. The last Sunday of the year will happen on December 28th. According to the calendar we have today, plus 5 more Sundays before we get to the last Sunday of 2025. And yet today is the last Sunday of the Christian liturgical calendar, so in some regards it's the last Sunday of the Christian year. We are finishing up that wonderfully named season of ordinary time, also known as the season after Pentecost, which was on June 8th. It's a long season. I think it's 26 weeks of this long season in our liturgical calendar. Ordinary. That sounds so bland. It doesn't sound exciting at all. Looking at the thesaurus, and some synonyms of ordinary are usual, settled, run-of-the-mill, and the oh so wonderful descriptive humdrum. Ordinary. It's not a word we often use to describe something because it sounds so negative and uncomplimentary, even if what part of our ordinary routine is seeking excellence. We would never refer to ourselves as, ordinary people who attend an ordinary church with just ordinary worship, and we just have a, ordinary ministry. Now, I'm not about to encourage you to go and tell others about this ordinary church you attend. Go and say to others, invite them to this ordinary church and see their responses. Chances are others will wonder, why do you attend just an ordinary church with ordinary Christians? See, we have this belief that we're supposed to be extraordinary. And we set high expectations for ourselves and for others. And we like superlatives. And we use them. Watch Wheel of Fortune or Family Feud. And listen to how the contestants will talk about their family members during the introductions. Sometimes it seems like the contestants are trying to outdo one another in the ways that they describe their awesome and amazing loved ones. It's great that they hold their family members in such high regard, but really are the people on these game shows that much more fortunate than the rest of us because they have these amazing family members who are the most beautiful and incredible and charismatic and delightful and fortuitous people ever. A family member may feel like they've been thrown under the bus if they hear, "Hi, Ryan. I have been married to my ever so humdrum husband for 10 years. And we have 2 run-of-the-mill children, and I work for a very ordinary company." You don't hear that, do you? I wish just one time we would hear that. Since this is the last Sunday of the Christian liturgical year, we might want to spend this time taking part in a year-end assessment, gauging how we're doing. How are we doing emotionally? How are we doing in relationships? How are we doing spiritually? How are we doing in the area of stewardship? How are we doing in showing compassion? I hope that we find that we are extremely ordinary in showing love to God. I hope that we are ordinary in loving others, ordinary in living out our faith so that our extraordinary God could do a good work among us. This is actually a better time to offer a year-end assessment than December 31st. If we just get on autopilot, and many times we do this time of year, we just go from Thanksgiving to Christmas to New Year's and not take time to pause or to be silent and simply to be aware of God and how God seeks to be at work in our lives. If we just get on automatic pilot, then we will eventually get run down and overfed and overspent throughout the upcoming month. If we see areas in our life that need attention, then there's no better time than this upcoming season of Advent, the 4 weeks before Christmas, where the Scriptures invite us to prepare for the coming of Christ. And we hear over and over again, keep awake, be spiritually alert, repent, live a life of holiness and godliness. As Christmas approaches, we can so easily get distracted by all the sights and the sounds of the season, and many of which are fun to experience and take in. But the Scriptures in Advent, Sunday after Sunday, they call us back. They invite us to be grounded, and they remind us of what normal and ordinary are to look like for the Christian. Not just for the Christmas celebrations and the coming of Christ, but how we might daily receive Christ into our lives, and how daily we see Christ in the other. Perhaps you're used to doing some year-end assessments in your work, and we review that with your boss. And it's good to see just how we're doing. Are we doing the right things? And are we doing the right things at the right time? Keep doing this, stop this, correct this. And we're accustomed also to going to the doctor for that yearly physical or that wellness check where we will get the results from the blood work. And we review the numbers with the doctor. And in that examination, we will be advised, keep doing this, stop this, correct over here, cut out these foods that you're going to have on Thanksgiving Day, add the exercise to your daily routines. And these yearly assessments can very well do what? Extend our life if we take seriously the recommendations, the concerns, and make changes and come up with a new normal with diet, physical exercise. And let that be part of our ordinary day. And so as Christians, we ought to be asking ourselves the same kinds of questions. How am I doing? How am I doing in living the Christian life? What do I need to add? Am I loving God and loving others? Is it become ordinary to who I am? What do I need to continue to do? What do I need to let go of? Does my life reveal that Christ is Lord and King of my life? And if not, if there are places in my life that I have not yet given over to God, maybe now is the time to surrender that part of ourselves to Christ who is Lord, to Christ who can redeem. On this Christ the King Sunday, our gospel lesson can help us with this kind of year-end assessment as we consider just how well we as a church, but also how well we as individuals are loving God and loving others. Today's teaching from Jesus reads like a parable. And some will see the story of the judgment of the nations as a parable. That's in keeping with the stories that come before this one. The story of the parable of the bridesmaids and the parable of the talents. Others will not treat this like a parable. Prior to our lesson, we have the 10 bridesmaids and the talent, and we're to draw some conclusions about the importance of doing the right thing. From that story of the bridesmaids, the right thing was to be what? Personally prepared. In the story of the talents, the right thing was to be good stewards with all that's been entrusted to us. However, this story of the judgment of the nations is not commonly referred to as a parable. It's actually the only narrative descriptive we have in the New Testament of what a day of judgment could look like. And if we're not careful in the way we treat this passage, we may draw the conclusion that being included among the sheep rests solely upon what you and I do, as if salvation is something that we can earn by good works, and that good behavior and being good are our punch ticket into heaven. When Jesus is the one who punched the ticket. The story of the judgment begins with the image of Jesus that we are comfortable with. We read that all the nations will be gathered before him, and he, Jesus, will separate people from one another as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. We really can't get enough of the shepherd image. What is one of the all-time favorite psalms? How does that begin? The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. We find great comfort in the shepherd who lays down his life for the sheep. And Jesus describes himself in the Gospel of John as, I am the good shepherd. And we find great comfort in that parable where the shepherd realizes that there's one of 100 sheep that are missing, and he goes out of his way to find and to rescue and bring back that lost sheep that is now found. We love the shepherd image of Jesus. We can't get enough of it. We put it in stained glass after stained glass. And when we feel tired and weary, when we feel like we're lost, or we feel just plain give out, we can find great comfort not just in that image, but with the understanding that Jesus is our good shepherd, who leads us to places of rest, who leads us to places where our soul can be restored. But then the story, in this judgment narrative, the shepherd image yields to one where Jesus is likened to a king. And this reference to king in the story is why this lesson is an appropriate one on this last Sunday of the liturgical year known as Christ the King Sunday. Now, Jesus doesn't often refer to himself as king, even though throughout the Gospels, right there in the genealogy and in the story of the wise men that we'll hear on that first Sunday in January, the question is asked, where is the child who's been born King of the Jews? And when Jesus at the end, when he's on the cross, there's the inscription above his head that reads, this is Jesus, the King of the Jews. This image of Jesus as king, it's not all that inviting to us. The act of compassion as a shepherd separates sheep and goats, turns Jesus as a king handing down a judgment where some receive blessings and inherit the kingdom prepared for them, while others to eternal punishment. And the finality of this is something we're not comfortable with. But the story is not a means to induce guilt to do the right thing. It's not a means to scare or to condemn, but rather encourage us in the way of loving like Jesus. Encouraging us to assess, how are we doing? How are we doing on our walk with Christ, who is Lord? Do we have the ability to see Christ in the other and then treat them accordingly? Is Christ truly Lord of our life and King of our days? Or is such talk mere lip service, something that sounds good when we sing on a Sunday in worship, but then Monday comes around and we can just get busy doing our own thing, hoping to encounter a shepherd who can save us from sometimes the mess we find ourselves in, rather than to be met by King Jesus, who demands that we live according to his way and not our own. Not for our good, but for the sake of the kingdom. Christ as powerful king is not something we easily embrace. Perhaps that has something to do with living in America where we never wanted a king ruling over us. And we favor a presidency where there are term limits and a government where there's to be a balance of power between the three branches. In this story that shifts from shepherd to king, we understand that Jesus is the one who saves and rescues and comforts like a shepherd. But Jesus also has the power to execute judgment like a king. Jesus does have power to reign, not simply at the right hand of God in the heavenly realm, but to rule where? To rule in our hearts and the lives of people. But Jesus is no ordinary king. He truly has concern for who? For all people. A good king is one who seeks peace and harmony, not just for a select few, but throughout the kingdom. And a good king is one who ensures good practices are in place so that the basic needs of everyone are met. And so a good king like Jesus is one who seeks to serve and not be served. Jesus is one who embodied compassion and love. And in the story of the sheep and the goats being separated, we learn that just as Jesus was one who had compassion, he expects us, as kids of the kingdom, as Christians, disciples, to do likewise, to show compassion, to love one another. And when we are showing compassion and love to others, we are showing such compassion and love to Christ our King. In this lesson, we run through the acts of mercy that were rather commonplace, rather ordinary in Palestine when Jesus walked the earth. To the hungry, what's the best thing to do? Give them food. For the thirsty, a cup of cold water. A stranger is to be well received, and people are to have clothing. The sick are to be cared for, and the imprisoned not left alone, but to be visited. And as children of God, this care for others, it's part of who we are and what we do. And such acts are not reserved for days when the church holds a mission experience or mission event, or when we are encouraged to get children gifts for kids with the angel tree. But such acts are to be part of our ordinary daily practices. We're called to do the right thing, to embrace the right practices, revealing love to God and to all. These practices of love are praised in this narrative of judgment. And there's nothing in the story of divine judgment about one's capacity to memorize the church's creeds. We hear nothing about good, sound theology, about which side you might be on, or orthodoxy, having a right belief about God. Faith can so easily be lived within the confines of our minds or in the hallowed halls of an institution or in our place of study, but living faith out among people, amid contrasting cultures, in the messy part of life, in the midst of oftentimes competing theologies and ecclesial stances, that is where living out our faith is challenging. And to make that ordinary over and over again, day after day. And yet, we're called to do the right thing. And to always see the Christ in the other. And we can never take for granted our faith. And we need to remove from our thinking that living the Christian life is easy. I'm finding it more difficult today to live and think like a Christian, not because of the challenges outside the church, but among Christians who have differing understandings of what faithfulness and godliness and inclusivity and the show of compassion look like. We're called to see Christ in the other, in each other, to show compassion to the least of these that Jesus speaks of. And just who are the least that Jesus speaks of here? We usually go right to the poor. It's always the poor or the least. When Jesus speaks of the least of these in the story, he's referring to his disciples who were dependent upon the hospitality and the generosity of others. So who are the least? Who are the least in our midst today? The immigrant? The person who lives by a different creed? The person whose lifestyle you don't understand, or whose theology is to the left or to the right of your stance? Is it the millennial who always is challenging the status quo in the institutional church? Is it the older person who's confined to a hospital bed? Are the least the ones who come to the church on Friday afternoons for agape? Or the people we'll serve beginning on Wednesday night through CAST, the homeless shelter for Chesapeake? Just who are the least of these in our midst? And how can we best show compassion? Jesus says to the righteous, just as you did it to one of the least of these who are members of my family, you did it to me. And they're surprised. And yet Jesus challenged those to see the least as representing him. Today we are challenged to see Christ in each other, and this doesn't mean that others are more godly or more deserving or more righteous. But it doesn't mean that in order to see the Christ in the other, we truly need to see them and to seek to establish relationships with others and not just offer the cup of cold water or the food to eat and the clothes to wear. So friends, as this Christian year draws to a close, how are you doing? How are we doing? How are we doing in showing compassion? How are we in being empathetic? How are you doing in showing love to God and loving to others? Is it well with your soul? Is it well with your soul as you put your faith and love into everyday action, which is the hallmark of what it means to be a Methodist, really to be a Christian, to put your faith and love into everyday, ordinary practice? Is doing the right thing part of your ordinary routine and practice, or is it just reserved for charitable acts of service that make us feel good? What do you need to do? What do you need to keep doing? What do you need to stop doing? What do you need to try doing in this upcoming season of Advent? And if Victor Hugo is right, when he wrote the wonderful lyric, or those words, to love one another is to see the face of God, then just where are you seeing God? Hopefully these God sightings are not just happening every now and then, but in the normal, in the ordinary, in the run-of-the-mill days of living the life as a Christian among ordinary, everyday people. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, amen.